Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This time we're diving into, well, networks in education.
Ooh, networks.
Yeah, it was a specific request, actually.
Interesting.
Our main source is a doctoral thesis all about, it's called Project Child and Youth Mental Health,
Okay.
or they shorten it to Project CYMH.
Project CYMH.
Got it.
So we're going to take a deep dive, how this program connects research with, what people are actually doing in schools,
Okay.
in Ontario school districts.
In Ontario, Canada.
Yes.
Interesting. I know a little bit about this. It's a pretty, well, the context is really interesting because the Ontario Ministry of Education, they've been pushing for schools to make decisions, based on research.
Right. Evidence-informed or research-informed, they say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there's this pressure on the school districts to be using research, especially when it comes to, student mental health.
Mm-hmm.
That's where Project CYMH comes in.
Right. To bridge the gap. Yeah, they help them bridge the gap
Hmm.
between, what the research says and then what's actually happening in the schools and the classrooms.
And how to take that research and make it practical.
Exactly, exactly. So what's really cool about this thesis is the researcher, they used this method called social network analysis to actually study this program.
Okay, about that?
So instead of just looking at the structure of the program, they actually looked at the relationships between all the different people involved
Oh, okay.
to see how, knowledge and information was flowing through all these different connections.
So you can actually see who was talking to whom.
Exactly, exactly. You can map it out. And so, instead of just assuming that the program achieved its goals, you can actually see, what kind of impact it had on those connections and how people were sharing information.
So that's interesting because one of the findings is that the network that was focused on research sharing was far less connected than some of the other relationship networks that they looked at.
Right. Isn't that interesting?
It's surprising.
You think if the whole goal is to connect research with practice,
Yeah,
the research part would be the most active.
right.
But it turned out that most of the research sharing was happening at those formal program events, like workshops or meetings.
Not just emailing each other's studies.
Yeah, not so much those informal day-to-day interactions.
Okay, so it's less about mental health leaders just sharing studies and more about the program itself, disseminating research.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And one of the mental health leaders, actually said that, quote, Project CYMH is our key source of research knowledge.
Okay.
So they were getting valuable research from the program,
They were.
but maybe not that peer-to-peer exchange that you might expect.
Right. Okay, so who are the main players here?
So the main participants are, they call them mental health leaders
Okay.
or MHLs.
MHLs, okay.
And they're from all these different school districts, right? And they're basically tasked with taking all this research and turning it into actual mental health strategies in their schools.
Mm-hmm.
And they get support from coaches who are experts in mental health
Okay.
to kind of guide them and provide support. And, this thesis, it looked at two different groups of school districts, who participated in Project CYMH.
Oh, okay. Two different cohorts.
Yeah, two different cohorts. So the first cohort, they were the early adopters, they were kind of figuring things out as they went along.
The guinea pigs.
Exactly. And then the second cohort, they joined later.
Okay.
So, you're talking about how important those social dynamics are for knowledge sharing, right?
Right.
Well, one of the interesting things is that first cohort, since they had more time to connect and build relationships,
Right.
they actually developed a much stronger community.
Okay.
They were more likely to turn to each other for advice and support.
So they're the exclusive club.
Yeah, kind of like a club of early adopters, right?
Right.
They went through it together.
They all had that shared experience.
Exactly.
And so what about the second cohort? Did they struggle to connect? Because the first cohort was already there.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, the second cohort definitely benefited from the program. Don't get me wrong. They got a lot of great resources. They got a lot of support.
Yeah.
But they didn't seem to develop the same level of close connection as the first cohort.
Okay.
And remember, we were talking about those time constraints.
Right.
Busy schedules and all that.
Yeah, it's always a factor.
Right. That was especially true for the second cohort. They had even less time for those informal interactions.
Okay.
Which are so important for building those, strong relationships.
Right, so it's the informal stuff is really where the magic happens.
Totally. It's not just about having access to the research.
Right.
Right. It's about having this network of people that you trust, you can bounce ideas off
But
of.
you can learn from.
Exactly. And the research dove into four specific types of relationships that they were looking at within Project CYMH.
Okay.
So there was seeking research knowledge, seeking advice, influence, and social support.
Okay.
So we already talked about the research knowledge network, right?
Right.
But all those other ones are important too, right? To understand the full impact of this program.
So the first cohort, with their tight bonds, they had an advantage when it came to seeking advice or support.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's exactly what we're going to get into next. How did that play out in those other networks?
Okay, let's get into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so those other networks, those advice and support networks, was there a difference there too?
Totally, yeah. When we look at those, it's even clearer that first cohort, those early adopters with their strong bonds, yeah, that club, they had an advantage. They were always turning to each other for advice. They had this built-in peer mentoring thing going on.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense, right? They had this shared experience of being the first ones through the program so they could really understand each other's challenges.
Exactly. And remember we talked about geography playing a role too,
Yeah.
how MHLs in similar locations would connect.
Right.
That was really evident in those advice and support networks too.
It makes sense, right?
Wh-
If you're the only MHL in a rural district and you're trying to figure out how to actually make these strategies work, it's so helpful to know somebody in a similar district who's already been there.
Totally. One MHL actually talked about that, how valuable it was to get advice from others facing those same challenges because it gave them this sense of solidarity and
But
understanding.
they weren't alone in it.
Exactly. So Project CYMH kind of accidentally created this amazing peer support system.
Yeah, especially for that first group. It's they had a head start. But what about technology? Didn't they have that online platform, eNet?
Right. Beat it.
Did that help bridge the gap for the second cohort who didn't have as much time for that face-to-face stuff?
eNet was definitely designed for that, to help people connect and share knowledge, even when they couldn't be in the same room.
Yeah.
But its impact was kind of mixed, you know?
Okay.
Some MHLs really used it a lot, especially in that first cohort. They were sharing resources and connecting on there all the time. But others, not so much.
Just like any tool, right?
Mm.
It depends on how people use it and how it fits into what they're already doing.
Exactly. One coach even said that eNet didn't really meet their expectations. They said some people loved it, some people hated it, and a lot of people just didn't use it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it just shows how important it is to think about the user experience when you're rolling out new technology.
Ugh.
You can't just give people a platform and expect it to work. You have to actually build a culture that encourages people to use it and make sure it actually meets their needs.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, so what about those coaches? They were supposed to be a key part of this whole thing. Right. Providing individual guidance and support.
Yeah, exactly. That was their role, to bridge the gap between research and practice and provide that tailored one-on-one support.
Right.
And the MHLs really valued them. They reinforced the learning from those big group sessions and helped people translate research into actual strategies they could use in their schools.
So it wasn't just, here's the research, go do it. They actually got help figuring out how to apply it.
Yeah, that personalized guidance was really important. But it's interesting, the level of interaction with the coaches really varied.
Okay.
Some MHLs relied on them a lot, others were more independent.
Right. Makes sense. Everyone's different.
Exactly. So overall, though, it seems like the coaches were a really positive part of the program. But even with all this support, Project CYMH still faced some constraints.
Right. We talked about those time constraints, especially for the second cohort.
Yeah, those were huge. But there were other things, too. One concern was that by focusing only on the MHLs, the program might be missing a really crucial audience.
Ooh.
The superintendents and other district leaders who are actually making the big decisions about budgets and policies.
Oh, right. The people with the power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's you're giving all the players the right skills and equipment, but then sending them out onto a field where the rules of the game haven't changed.
Makes sense.
One coach specifically mentioned this, how important it is to build communication with those higher level leaders.
Right. To make sure that the research project CYMH is sharing actually translates into changes at the district level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Individual knowledge and skills are important, but they need to be supported by a system that's actually receptive to change.
And that brings us back to the structure of the research network itself.
Yeah, good transition.
We talked about how most of the research sharing happened at those formal events rather than through those more organic conversations.
Right.
Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, while those coaches were super knowledgeable and dedicated, their role as like the main source of research information may have unintentionally created a sort of bottleneck.
Oh,
So
interesting.
instead of MHLs having direct access to the researchers and being able to have those more spontaneous conversations about new findings,
Right.
they were mostly getting information filtered through the coaches.
Okay.
It's not that the coaches were withholding information or anything,
Hmm.
but their role as intermediaries did shape how that information flowed through the network. And it makes you wonder, did this more centralized approach, while it definitely provided valuable support, did it maybe limit the diversity of perspectives and those opportunities for like bottom-up innovation?
Right. Could there be a way to balance that need for structured guidance with the benefits of a more open exchange of research between peers?
That's the million-dollar question. And it really highlights how important it is to critically examine those structures we create to support knowledge mobilization. Like, how do we make sure they're actually facilitating the flow of information and the development of those relationships instead of hindering them?
It's a tough balance, right? You need those experts to translate and apply the research, but you don't want to stifle those organic connections where people can really learn from each other.
Yeah, finding that balance is key. But remember, it's not just about the structure of the network.
Right.
It's also about the people in it. Their characteristics and experiences play a huge role in how they engage with and share knowledge.
So we haven't talked much about the MHLs themselves. Did the research say anything about what kind of MHLs were more likely to be those active sharers?
That's a great question. And that's actually where we're going to go next. The researcher looked at a bunch of different professional characteristics to see how they related to network activity. And what they found is pretty fascinating.
So those MHLs, the ones who were really good at sharing research and connecting with people, what made them different? Were they all like research experts?
That's what you might think, right? But it was actually more than that.
Okay.
So, yeah, having experience doing research, that did matter.
Okay.
But the researcher also found that those MHLs, the really connected ones, they saw research as like directly relevant to their work.
Oh, okay.
And they also tended to have like strong relationships with researchers already.
So it's not just about having done research, it's about valuing it and knowing the people who do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like they'd already bridged that gap between research and practice.
Right.
They saw research as a tool to actually like solve problems in their schools.
Not just something theoretical.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So they could probably explain to other MHLs like why it matters.
Totally, totally. And that probably made them more effective at advocating for using research in decision making.
Right, because they get it.
Yeah, they see the value. And this highlights how important it is to build those relationships between researchers and people actually working in schools.
Right, so if you have a connection to a researcher,
Yeah,
you're more likely to see their research as relevant to you.
exactly. Exactly. Like it's not so intimidating.
Right.
And that brings us back to that interesting finding about the research sharing network being less dense.
Right, right.
Like the program did a good job of sharing research,
Yeah.
but those informal connections where there's trust and shared experience, those seem really important for actually creating a culture where people use research.
Like that first cohort, the club.
Exactly.
They probably felt more comfortable sharing research with each other, even outside of those formal program things.
Right, because they had that foundation of trust.
Right,
So it shows that just giving people access to research isn't enough.
right. You have to build relationships too.
You need to create those spaces where people can talk about their experiences.
Yeah, ask questions.
Debate stuff.
Like, how do you actually apply this research in a real school?
Exactly. Exactly. It's messy. And that's where storytelling comes in.
Oh, interesting.
Like when MHLs share stories about how they're using research, it's more relatable.
Right.
It's not just an article in a journal anymore.
Yeah, it's something real.
It's a real solution that worked for someone.
Like, hey, I tried this and here's what happened.
Exactly. Exactly. That personal touch makes a difference.
Well, it's all about balance.
Yeah.
Structure, but also spontaneity,
Right.
experts, but also those peer connections.
Exactly. Exactly. Find that sweet spot. And, as we wrap up, there's one last thing from the research I wanted to mention.
Okay.
A bit of a cautionary note
Uh-oh.
about groupthink.
Oh, right, groupthink.
Yeah,
When everyone agrees, even if it's not the best idea.
exactly.
Mm.
And while the researcher didn't actually see evidence of groupthink in Project CYMH,
Okay.
they did say it's something to watch out for.
Especially as these networks grow.
Right. Like
Yeah.
just because everyone's getting along.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean everyone's opinion is actually being heard.
You need different perspective.
Exactly. Exactly. So create a culture where people can disagree respectfully.
Right. Don't be afraid to speak up.
Exactly. Challenge the status quo. Ask those tough questions.
Bring something new to the table.
Right, because healthy networks, they need diverse perspectives.
Right. Debate is good.
Exactly. Exactly. That's how we learn and find the best solutions.
Well, this has been a great deep dive. We've learned so much about how networks work in education.
I agree. It's fascinating stuff. And this research on Project CYMH has some really valuable lessons for anyone trying to connect research with practice.
If you're interested in learning more, definitely check out the full thesis.
Yeah, it's worth a read.
And as always, keep those connections strong and keep that knowledge flowing. We'll see you next time.